Hi and welcome to BPI TV. My name's Dan Stanton and I'm joined here by Dr Günter Jagschies, who comes from GE Healthcare Life Sciences. Günter, it's a pleasure for you to be here. I've just listened to your plenary session here at BPI Europe, and there's so many areas we could go down, very interesting. But one thing I wanted to pick up with you is the relatively small percentage of the cost of bringing a drug to market where which manufacturing covers. I think in your talk you put it at around 5%. In many ways that surprised me, as we are kind of all here to discuss reducing that price. Why are we here, I guess?
Well, I guess first of all, you have to realize how high prices are. So if you express things in percentage, then obviously versus a high price, that manufacturing cost percentage goes down purely by mathematics. And then what I'm counting here as 5%, which is an average,
Sure.
Can be higher, can be somewhat lower even. That's the core facility with the process in there, the equipment and the people. And it's for drug substance, which is what most people here deal with in this conference, and then drug product, which is the filled and finished good that gets to the patient. So I deduct the drug product, because that's not for these people, and I deduct lots of overhead costs, and I have talked about that with a financial manager for a large manufacturing operation who gave me some advice how to read the annual reports and deduct these things. And we agreed that for, say, the larger manufacturers in this world, the leading companies, not just Genentech, Roche, but a number of others, these costs are somewhere around 5% for the drug substance, and just for this facility, equipment, process and people. The core thing that we can all influence together with our technology. That's why this percentage is low. The reporting of manufacturing in annual reports looks more like 20%.
So some of the end users here, are they quite surprised by some of your findings, or was it always there and it's just not?
No, I think this is not widely understood. Actually, when I talk to people, even senior people in the industry, some of them would admit that they don't exactly know where these costs are. I mean, that is obviously not out of lack of interest, but the way how financial management in all corporations works is someone is responsible for a certain area, like R&D, like manufacturing, and then that someone gets accountability to work on the cost structure that he or she is accountable for. So they are focusing on that, and they don't necessarily see the whole picture. But as I mentioned that example of the head of operations who said cost for me is position number 7 in my ranking list of priorities. And it was very obvious why, because he had quality aspects and other things to deal with, supply to patients, which always has to be guaranteed. And in fact, as soon as you get to regular manufacturing, those costs are pretty low.
But I mean, still, when single-digit percentages, when we're talking about something like biosimilars or a highly competitive therapy or type of therapy, shaving 1 or 2% off is going to make that company a lot more competitive.
Yeah,
no?
Right. I mean, well, I mean the first problem is when you take biosimilars or in general competition, one thing that happens is prices go down, which means that the total volume of cash every year to pay for manufacturing, R&D, the whole sales and marketing and administration, and then of course a profit as well, obviously gets reduced. It goes right down to the bottom line. Every price reduction does in every industry. And that means that when you look at a biosimilar that may want to reduce the price relative to the established levels in the West by 50–70%, that has happened already in Europe, right, with biosimilars entering the European market. Then all of a sudden, in percentage terms, manufacturing goes up to maybe 40–50% of their cost, which is a similar situation to the vaccine industry, where we have had this since decades. And so, sure, in that scenario, manufacturing cost savings will contribute to keep cash flow going towards R&D and other activities the company needs to provide. And of course, again, the profits that the owners expect from them. It has to come, among other things, from manufacturing, also from more efficient R&D, but manufacturing is certainly key there. So I never said or never intended to say that cost is unimportant. It's very dependent on the situation where it will be on the priority list.
And so I guess when we're going into next generation therapy types, ADC, cell and gene therapies, mRNA, the fact that there are no sort of standardized platforms or relatively very few, getting the cost of manufacturing at a reasonable level is going to become even more important, no?
Yeah, it's, I mean, again, dependent on where people can price those. This industry is not pricing based on cost, it's pricing based on perceived value. So if you assume that a cell therapy can actually cure someone from cancer, you know, it may happen in the future, it may happen in individual cases already now, then the value of that is so high that, again, manufacturing is a very moderate figure in that picture. But I think for these modalities that you just mentioned, we will still need to do our homework, very basic homework, to establish efficient platforms for manufacturing, efficient approaches to begin with, and then later on maybe standardized platforms. So I think in the first round of these things to come to market, we will have to accept a certain degree of inefficiency, cost-wise and otherwise, in the manufacturing, and that's fine, because we are on a learning curve altogether. But just as with MABs, and just as I showed, you know, there's technology coming which may actually allow to create platforms a lot more than we could do today. You know, an affinity step, for example, which makes everything just so much more robust, seems to be on the horizon, I would say, for many more things than just MABs. And so once we get there, we can talk about the fine-tuning and the optimization of everything so that we get to the lowest possible manufacturing costs.
I'm taking the example of Chimera last year when it was launched by Novartis. It was attacked for being exceptionally expensive. I know it's a one-off cure, and it probably relatively isn't as expensive as some other drugs, but that was attacked by certain aspects of the public. Alexion Soliris a few years ago was criticised for its high drug price, and both companies came out at the time, I believe, and blamed manufacturing, or attributed this to the manufacturing process. Is manufacturing sometimes perhaps used as a scapegoat for high pricing?
I think so. I would say so, yeah. I mean, basically, the point is that we are on a learning curve, especially with cancer drugs. The development of science, or the pace at which the understanding of these diseases develops, is much slower than the pace of revenue from drugs that we have launched for example, cancer, where we see humongous, I mean, great growth rates. Some of these products make it to $4 or $5 billion revenues in just a few years. But admitting that we are still on a learning curve, that means also that as long as we don't say, you know, we want to go back to socialism or any system like that where, you know, profit is bad, we need to accept that this learning will cost a price. And if you would read, I mean, one of the things that where I learned a lot, I think I learned a lot from that, was a book discussing cancer, The Emperor of All Maladies. And there you can see how long we have already been experimenting with different types of cancer treatments, and how unsuccessful we really have been, you know, getting to a point where cancer becomes manageable. And so if we want to beat cancer at one point, and it's not one disease, it's 100 disease, and if I get a certain type of cancer and you get it, it's going to develop differently in both of us. So it's not only just 100, it's multiplied by almost by the number of patients. If you want to get a grip on this will cost society. And as long as we do this drug development and therapy development in a model whereby we say it's private, so it has to generate, of course, the product, but then also a profit. We have to play by those rules, and that means that high prices actually can be defended. I think I wouldn't be shy to say, well, this is what it costs in the first round of these developments. I would not make manufacturing accountable for that. R&D maybe, and maybe sales, and maybe the regulators, but almost definitely not manufacturing.
But unfortunately, those are very different subjects that we probably don't have time to get into right now.
You can't change R&D in short term. You can't really influence the regulators, or not, in that way. They are agnostic when it comes to cost, essentially. Sometimes they say not, but they are. They have to get independent. So I think the manufacturing screw is one of the few screws you can turn if you are in management, and that's why it's being turned. It's very natural. It happens in all companies, my own included, probably yours as well.
That's why it's so. That's why it's being discussed so much here at BPI Europe. Yeah. I have one final question, because I believe you have published a book being fabled as sort of the A to Z of bioprocessing. Briefly, tell me what that's all about.
Yeah. It's a sort of textbook which we put together with about 100 authors from the industry, from our own company. And it starts from looking at the disease priorities around the globe, to basically put everyone on the same page. Looks at the businesses of biopharma, the molecules that we have and what we have in the pipeline, looking into the future. It defines the requirements on processes in general, and then goes into all the technologies we use in the process. So it's everything from cell line development up to the final step leading to drug substance in technology terms. And then there are some case studies from the industry looking at mAbs, bispecifics, ADCs, microbial derived proteins, and we're looking at the CMC, sort of a regulatory aspect, analytics, and then at the end also economics. So it's I think I'm pretty proud of this, obviously. It's a pretty unique compilation of different aspects. It's by no means totally comprehensive. Then I think I would have had to take another 3 years. But yeah, I think it's the story of biopharmaceuticals, where we are today with them, and it offers a lot of food for thought, right? I'm not saying there's one opinion, one view on things. It's always a bit ambiguous, as I try to point out in my talk too.
Günter, I'd like to thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.
And I hope you enjoy the rest of the show.
I will, certainly.
For BPI TV, I'm Dan Stanton.